Today we are going to learn about a new concept of private credit. Okay, we'll understand in this chapter what is private credit and how it's replacing your traditional uh, credit ways, like in traditional ways of lending or borrowing money, right? So let's just go through it. Learning objectives first is to describe the structure and characteristics of private credit funds, how they are made, who are the investors in these, and as well as the patterns in the global growth of asset class. So how credit is growing, right? Discuss the potential drivers of private credit growth and interrupt regression results about their impact. So we'll see their growth drivers and how things are changing. We will be the regression results that they are talking about. We will be looking as to how diverse this is, and what are the things. Then we will compare private credit loans with bank loans and assess how changes in cost of equity, cost of debt, and leverage have influenced the competitive dynamics between them. Again, once we you understand what is private credit loans, you will also understand that why private credit is so prominent today, because the way they are composed and the way a traditional banking system works is very different, right? Looking at it first, when you talk about private credit, we have 2.5 trillion plus global private, global private credit asset under management today. So it's like, it's a big amount that is, say basically you compare it with the traditional loans industry, like banking industry, that so many loans are provided by bank. But if you look at private credit, it's almost 2.5 trillion plus, right? And it was, if you talk about back in 2000s, it has grown from only point 0.2 trillion. You see, it's a massive change, right? How the industry dynamics are changing, where people are moving from one source of credit to other. Almost 90% US states share of global originations, Europe, UK, and Canada make up the most of. When you look at the private credit industry, 90% of it comes from your US, and rest of the 10% is, from other regions, say Europe, UK, and Canada. Why it matters is rapid growth, opaque structures, growing links to banks rising the raise the stability questions. All of this you will understand once you understand what's credit and how it's composed, right? Um, so the question for you to understand is what is private credit and how it grew, what drove the growth, and how its cost of capital has come to rival banks. That's like this roadmap is exactly what we are going to study in this chapter. So now, what is private credit? Right, it's um, just one second now. Yeah, let me just give you before we jump into all these bits. Private credit is basically when I have to say get a loan, right? Let's say I am a corporate, or and I have to get a loan. There are two ways for me to get a loan. One is I'll go to your traditional bank, I'll ask them for a loan, and they will look at my credit history, they'll do all the checks and all that, and then they will give me a loan, right? But today there are other, ways where I can borrow money, right, rather than your traditional banking system. In fact, you guys would have seen, like, there are many apps and other things have also come up, right, where people can go and borrow money, and at different interest rates from banks. Now, why private credit? So what like it's a new thing that you can say people have started, where let's say there are people who are ultra rich, wealthy and all that, and they are looking for a different way to invest their money, right? Now rather than putting that money in the bank as a deposit, what they will provide is they will give what they will do is they'll give it to, you know, fund kind of thing, and they'll provide credit to people, right? Now if a traditional bank charges you 8 to 9% of interest, these private credit might charge you only 6.5, 7.5 kind of interest rate, right? And since this is coming from this is not your traditional banking system, your regulations are lesser in private credit. Scrutiny is also lesser, like, you know, people who are not able to seek loans from banks due to certain credit history, etc., they are able to seek loan through private credit system. So yeah, let's go through it. First is direct and negotiated. Loans are negotiated directly between the borrower and fund. That's exactly the term private would entail, right? That it's not like where when you say bank loans, right? This is not kind of that's not really a direct kind of borrowing. Say we all of us go to bank, we put in money, put our money in deposits, right? Further, that bank uses that money to give loans. That's how bank provides us some kind of interest, right? Only then bank will provide us some interest on FD if bank is earning some interest on that FD. And how they'll earn the interest on that FD by is by giving out loans. So that it's a non-direct, indirect, you can say, way of me lending my money in FD to someone, correct? But private credit is where loans are, the borrower and the creditor, they negotiate their loans directly, right? Originator holds the loan to maturity. Like there is no prepayment kind of thing. It is held in maturity, the loan. It's closed and and illiquid. Capital locked for the fund life. Like the term that you have decided that I am lending you money for 5 years. Now it will be lent for 5 years only. You can't just wrap it up within 4 years. Right, about 5 to 8 years is generally the life, not exchange traded and not open to most retail. Again, now this is an important point, that private credit is not open to most retail. This all the private credit thing that we are talking about, it happens for big borrowers like the companies, corporates, all that, right? Matched maturities. Fund life matches the average loan maturity, limits liquidity and maturity transformation risk, because the life of the fund is matching the loan maturity. When you say fund life matches loan maturity, is that I, as an investor, have given money to this bank. You will see business development companies who generally gives the private credit. Okay, so I've given my money to that BDC, and BDC has given the private credit, right? So if I've given my money for 5 years, BDC also will lend it for 5 years only, right? So that's where your fund life will match the loan maturity and limits, which will reduce your liquidity and maturity risk. Um, so, matching long term assets with locked in capital is what lets private credit safely hold illiquid loans, unlike deposit funded banks. Now, this is a very important point, okay? Till now, what we have read is generally where the disconnect comes is when you hold money for short term and lend it for long term, and that's where maturity mismatch happens. And if the circle does not continue, where you are not able to get where you are not able to roll out your short term funds, but you have long term liabilities on you. That maturity mismatch is what makes your bank go under, right? Makes your firm go under. So that won't happen here because you have already matched the maturity. Are you getting my point? Okay. So there are four lending strategies within private credit. First is direct lending, where borrower and loan originator will directly negotiate, right? They will have it will have floating rate, covenant heavy loans. Obviously, there will be a lot of covenants conditions that will be discussed. The dominant strategy, BDCs mostly do that. This happens and lending happens through your business development companies. Then comes the mezzanine, where junior or subordinated debt is there, and often with the equity participation rights. Like whoever is providing that credit, they will get some equity participation rights as well. Then is asset based, like your loans, basically, which is backed by hard collateral. You are putting in some collateral, like say real estate, infrastructure, aircraft, all of these things. Lastly, is the distressed one, where buying troubled debt such as non-performing loans at a discount. This is very common that we have earlier also read, right? That this is kind of a bet where you buy troubled loans, and if it performs better than, like the probability of earning good results becomes very high. Now is the BDCs, like the business development companies, how they become the retail facing vehicle. So what they are is these BDCs are about 20% of the US private credit market. Now we had studied like 2.5 trillion plus is the total private credit market, out of which 90% is coming from US. If you talk about the total out of that 90%, 20% is your private credit is given by your BDCs, right? Retail access often publicly listed, earlier redemption via option and features. These BDCs are publicly listed. Generally, we have, you don't provide private credit to people, like that's what we have written. Mainly it's not for retail, but these companies could be listed, right? So these BDCs are open to public investment through your listing, right? And oversight federal regulation, these are when you talk about regulation, these are federally regulated, right? Mutual fund like disclosure, same way like your mutual funds have to make disclosure, BDCs have to do that as well. Debt to equity capped at 2 to 1. Why the BDCs matter is they are the transparent data rich window into private credit, which is why cost of capital analysis focuses on them. We will do this cost of capital. The WAC formula is what we will revise in this. Okay. Who funds the private credit? Like now, who is putting money into these BDCs? Mostly institutional, because of course they have big money, like your pension funds, insurers, sovereign wealth funds, long horizons, right? So these are people. If you talk about, for example, pension funds, right? They have money for a long time horizon, and they also need vehicles to invest in, right? They also need to earn proper return, so that they can provide returns to the investors of the pension funds. So that's one vehicle for them becomes your private credit. Same way insurers, sovereign wealth funds. Now for all of these, we know that horizon is long, time horizon is long, because they don't have to be pension fund insurer, they don't have to immediately give money, right? Insurance might be, but not like it's like it's a cycle kind of thing it will be, but it's not like I have taken a policy today and tomorrow insurer has to pay me. It has these have low liquidity needs again, like they can keep their money locked for some time. Insurers increasingly allocating here. That's the trend that's going on. Now, retail small but growing, evergreen and interval funds quote retail money. More redemption demand raises liquidity risk. So now your retail people are also becoming part of this private credit, but obviously when any panic rises, these retail people are the first ones to take their money out of all these vehicles. So that's what we have.
Hi Twinkle. That is happening
Yeah.
as we speak. That the Apollo Global Management, RS Capital Management, the investors are demanding the money back. So they are
Okay.
releasing only 10% of whenever the investor demands. They release only 10%, 15%, and they say lock-in period, lock-in period. There are big disputes going on in USA now. Apollo
Oh,
and RS blew out capital. The investors retail investors are demanding the money back. Actually, this product is not suitable for retail people, right? It's more for insurance funds, as you said, life
yeah.
insurance, pension funds, like that, basically.
Yeah, because the very first thing that we we understood about the instrument itself, that they have to match the maturities of who is providing the money and who is getting the money. Correct? If that maturity itself does not match, that's it will beat the purpose of the product itself, right? So yeah, now what if retail money keeps flowing in? Funds could face the same asset liability mismatch. Exactly what we have discussed. Uh, the problem with retail investor is, when you talk about such big loans and everything, you can't really rely on a thing that retail investor won't demand its money back. War rises, retail people will run for getting their money out of such instruments. Any panic in your economy happens, retail investors are the first ones to take out their money. So that's why this is not really a suitable match for retail investors. Now, when you look globally for private credit, their loans have increased from $100 billion in 2010 to 1.2 trillion today. So there is a massive change. Now, there are three dimensions they are looking at it. Is first is geography. US almost 87 to 90% of originations. We already know that, right? Europe approx 6, UK 3 to 4, and Canada the rest. This we have already written, like how read how it's working across the geographies. Industries wasn't mostly manufacturing, TMT and industrials. Their share is now under 40% as clean tech and life sciences grow. Now, here is the interesting part, that is, not all of the industries are taking this private credit, right? This is only certain industries which are part of this private credit. That's your manufacturing, TMT industrials. Like earlier, they were the bigger ones. Now their share has also come down because clean tech and life sciences are also using the private credit. Lastly, scale global asset under management over 2.5 trillion. In the US, it exceeds total leverage loans or high yield bonds. This is the scale that it has grown with. The concentration paradox within private risk. There is let's see what's the concentration paradox. First is the benefit, like specializing in a few industries sharpens screening and monitoring, funds serve opaque riskier firms, banks reject. Now we have why this we have already discussed here, like it is only famous in certain industries. Not all of your industries are a part of private credit, right? And because only certain industries are part of this whole thing, that's why there is a concentration risk, right? Within banks, if you see, all of the industries are taking bank loans, right, and putting their money as deposits in banks. So it's much more diversified, you can say, which private credit as of now is not. So the benefit of this is like you have only few industries, so you are able to do your due diligence in a better way, because you know, okay, these are the kind of clients I have, and that's how those clients should look like, and that's how the things should work like, right? So it's easy for you to screen and monitor. If there are multiple businesses and you don't know how those businesses work like, and then it would be difficult to do the due diligence, right? So that's the benefit. Firms serve opaque, risky firms, banks reject. This is important, right? Like, what's the whole meaning of private credit? That if I can't get a loan from a bank, I can get it through a private credit. And mind you, not all companies which look risky fail, right? That's the very first thing we did in credit risk. Like, if your rating right now is low, right, and you survive for more than a year, your rating actually goes up. Not uh, like, that's the change happens, right? Like, we expect that yes, for a year or so you are risky, you might not pay back, but if you have survived that year, that means you have done good for your business. Same way, like, right now your credit score or something might not look good, that's why bank reject your loans, but private credit is there to give you that chance, right? So that's the benefit of having private credit. But there is risk also, that is little diversification. Now if you're concentrated only on few industries, and those industries, you know, some economic change happens, something happens, and that industry itself goes down, then how will your loans get paid back, right? So private credit has little diversification. This is
Again, because sorry for disturbing. Again, same thing is happening. That Apollo and RS, they given the loans to these large loans to AI companies, and those AI companies, some are not doing good. As a result,
yeah.
their loans are illiquid, and retail investors are asking the money back. This is the emergency situation actually now.
Right. So yeah, that's the thing, right? So it's like everything has its goods and bads. You really need to understand if that one is retail investors also need to understand if that's the right investment for them. Correct? Like, that's where your risk appetite, all of these things come into play. So yeah, these are little diversification. When you talk about this HHI, this is your diversification index, and if it is zero, that means you are diversified. If it's one, that means you are not at all diversified. So within private credit, your HHI is 0.74 in US, and 0.81 in non-US markets. That means it's like, almost non-diversified. Banks for the same index for banks you see is point 0.2 only. Like, banks are much more diversified than these private credit companies, so these companies will be affected by your sector specific downturns. Got it. So, for example, one thing that you need to remember is, as retail investors arrive, funds may be pushed toward diversification, right? Which could erode the local expertise edge that justifies the concentration. So again, like, if your retail investors are part of this, there are chances that diversification could be achieved. Yeah, you have a question here. Do you guys want to go through it? Done. Okay. So yeah, now four drivers of growth for private credit. How it's what are the things due to which private credit have grown so far? First is low policy rate. Next is weak bank efficiency, tighter regulation, and rising NFC leverage. We will go through each of these in the next slides. Yeah. So first is your rates. That private credits have when your policy rates are lower. So low for long squeeze, bank margins, deposit rates lag, assets yield fall. So what this policy rate means is that when you for any country, right, you have your bank regulator. Say for India it's RBI, and they tell you like this is the repo rate, this is that, and based on that repo rate your bank lending rate also changes. Correct? Do we all agree with this one point?
Yep.
Yeah. So now, if your policy rate is low, that means bank will also be able to charge people less. Correct? So in that terms, your deposit, banks will be able to charge less money to people, and they will also provide less money for the deposit holders. Like basically less interest for the deposit holders, right? So there basically there is no gain for the deposit holders, right? Are you getting this
True.
whole point? Like if there is less money, that policy rate is lower, that means banks will get less money themselves, right, in terms of interest they earn from their customers. And the same way they will be able to provide also less money to the deposit holders, so the margin is less. The bank's margin is very less in the whole thing. But for private credit, it's different, because they don't really actually work on the with the same regulations as under the bank does, right? So funds face no such squeeze floating assets and liabilities. For private credit, they don't have to worry about like I have to like they set a certain price, like this will be my interest rate that I'll charge you, and this is the interest rate that I'll provide you. They don't really work as of say in the same way as a normal bank would in terms of policy lending rates and deposit rates. So that's why their efficiency is much better than your traditional banking system. uh, got it? So yeah, that's just 1 second. Yeah, that's one. Second is your bank efficiency FI index. Now, when I'm talking here about FI index, it's not your financial institution index. It is your financial inclusion index. Got it? When yeah, so this is your financial FI means your financial included in financial inclusion index. So IMF FI index proxies how well banks meet loan demand. When I say financial inclusion, what it means is, let's say there are multiple businesses in your country, correct? So you can't say like I'll provide only loans to the businesses which look that they will definitely return money, and I won't give anyone else a chance. That's now not how a growing economy works, right? Your central banks, that's why the whole policy rates, monetary policy, all of these work out, right? Where your banks also have to make changes according to economic situation of the country. Sometimes they make credit easy for people to access, so just so that they can do business and they can make money for the country. That's the part of your financial inclusion where everyone gets a chance, right? So IMF FI index proxies how well banks meet loan demand. Low index banks undeserved SMEs lacking collateral. Uh, yeah. So what banks do is they do not really provide the loans to the small these SMEs, small and medium enterprise, which do not have collateral, because obviously banks also have to meet certain criteria, right? They a lot of things depends on bank to not go under, right? Because they hold normal retail deposits, etc. That's why for it's difficult to for if you only have banks in your economy, your financial inclusion will be very low, right? Funds step in with covenant based lending. Then comes your private credits. What they do is they will they are ready they to provide money. It's just that they will have some conditions, maybe higher rate, uh, you know that they will charge the customer, or some kind of, as we had seen earlier, like equity participation they will do, something of the sort, and they will make it all work. So that's the difference. That's because your traditional banking can't bring in that financial inclusion that is needed, so your private credit grows. uh, So yeah, and this is one driver that has that has the largest impact. That is your financial inclusion. Do you guys understand?
One of the thing is for the capital reserve. So let's say a bank, even if they want to, provide a credit to young and new companies
Yeah.
with the risk and all the other parameters, they would require a more capital reserve as well,
Exactly.
right?
Yes, that's totally right. That's why we see say that banks are under higher regulatory scrutiny than your see, the whole fundamental is different, right? Now, if you look at private credit, it's your institutional investors. They any which ways has high risk appetite, correct? So if something is failing, those have high risk appetite, less regulation, so it won't have that systemic impact on your economy.
Right,
Banks are like, they are the runners of your economy, where every person, say people who are as part of financial inclusion initiative within India, we have zero balance accounts. When you say a zero balance account, that legit means that you are not keeping any money in that bank, but still bank is spending money on keeping your account.
right.
uh,
Looks
See, like, ideally bank should not do that out of their own pocket, right? Because why do I keep your account if you're not keeping money? I'm not earning anything out of it. Business wise, it does not make so much sense. But again, there are certain regulations, that's why your government tells bank, okay, you must have zero balance accounts, because that's part of financial inclusion. We want everyone to, even unorganized markets and organized markets, everyone should have an equal access to our banking system. So yeah, that like the whole fundamental of how a private credit works and how banks work is different. And the point that you have brought up in terms of capital, that yes, if it's a riskier loan, bank has to in turn keep higher capital, and that's why they will say no to that loan. And but you don't want that person to go without an opportunity of uh, growing his business, right? Because just because he does not have any credit history now, or just because his business looks riskier now, you want to give them a chance. So that's where your private credit comes into picture. So in some countries, like, this is a digression. In some countries, there is one more thing, like your student loans. Within India, mostly we see student loans are provided by your banks, right? In foreign countries, student loans also you can get through these private institutions, through this private credit kind of system, right? Again, they might charge a little higher, but people who travel abroad, let's say I want to study from US, right? I don't have any credit history in US, right? Nobody knows me there. Just want to go and study there. So a traditional bank might not be willing to lend me. just because I got good grades, and my application looks good, and it feels like, yes, 2 years after my study I might get a job and I'll be able to pay back the bank. It's much riskier for a bank to give me loan at that point. And education loans are considered one of the very risky ones, because again, it does not you are not sure if your money will return or not, right? So then the next bit that you have is, you have your private credit that you can rely on. Got it, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Next is your regulation and leverage. Again, just as we have discussed right now, banks have stricter regulations. They have higher capital rules, and oversight makes banks retreat from riskier firms. I don't think I need to repeat it. We have already discussed, because banks have to follow certain regulations. They are under regulatory scrutiny, so they won't be able to provide credit to everyone, because of the kind of capital they need to maintain and kind of services they need to provide. So those borrowers in turn run to private funds, right? Rising NFC leverage, that is non-financial corporate leverage, climbed for decades. So your non-financial companies, they also so for banks, the NFC leverage has increased. Funds are more willing than banks to lend to highly leveraged firms. If you have already, you are already leveraged, so the bank might not give you more leverage, but a private fund might provide. So smaller effects is like the that both matter, but the regression shows their economic impact is much smaller than the rates or bank efficiency that we have discussed above. Now what regression shows is like, here they have discussed all these points. We have discussed all these points, right? Low policy rates, bank efficiency, then regulation and leverage. If you compare all 4 points, what comes out is bank efficiency index, direction is lower index, more private credit. That economic impact is, it has the largest economic impact of around 33%. Next is the policy rate. Lower the policy rate, more the private credit. So how you look at it is, lower the financial inclusion index, higher the private credit, because you want to bring in more uh, financial inclusion in your country, right? If your policy rate is lower, banks will have less margins, so private credit will grow. Regulatory stringency, because higher the stringency, then if there is are more stricter rules, banks will be able to provide less money, then your private credit will grow. And same way, non-financial corporation leverage, if the leverage is higher, then your private credit again in turn will grow. But this is the weakest factor, because not every firm will get credit in that sense. Right, highest impact you have is from bank efficiency if you run a regression. So yeah, this you do not need. It's understood, right, what we are trying to say?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, just give me a second. Next is demand versus supply, right? Demand, obviously, like in every industry you have to look into your demand and supply. When you say your private credit industry pre GFC, it was demand driven, where people were asking, right? Before 2012, undeserved firms sought flexible credit, because they were not getting money from the banks. So growth was also more growth of private credit was not too much, right? Then is supply driven. Now firms are providing that credit. uh, the picture has changed, not that the people are asking for it, right? because of the low rates and tighter bank rules cut funds cost of capital, institutional money poured in and growth accelerated. Now because institutional investors are getting less money out of their investments from banks and other things, that's why they want to find out different something uh, a different vehicle for their money. That's where your private credit industry have grown. uh, so it makes sense, right? Earlier it's like people are asking for money. Now the thing has changed. Private credit is also booming. They are providing more money to more people because that's where your higher return potential is there. Fine. We have a question here. You guys please go through it. Just give me a second. I'll go on mute. But please just let me. Shall we move forward?
Yeah, yes, let's yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, now we are just comparing private credit loans versus the bank loans. How private credit loans work is these are more flexible, tailored covenants because the um, here it you can customize the covenants as per the who is seeking the credit, right? So it will be more flexible. Customization will be more there higher. We have already discussed that this will be more available to people than your bank loans will be, right? It has faster execution and willing to renegotiate. Your traditional banking loans need more approvals, no more need people to kind of agree to what kind of terms of credit you are providing, and most of these are standardized as well, right? If someone has to say take an education loan, the policy rate that goes in the market is 9, I think 9 to 10%. There are very less people who are able to negotiate that rate of interest, right? And they get a chance to negotiate as well. But private credit, the negotiation is more. The people again, because it's not that authority, right? Today my approval will approve it, next the higher authority will approve it. Rather than that, they have faster executions. So they serve thin collateral, high leverage borrowers, where collateral is lesser, or the borrower already has leverage. That's where your private credit kind of serves in. Sorry. Next is your bank loans. They are more standardized. They have more standardized terms, as I have told you, right? And they are slower in terms of each authority, each person needs to kind of sign off the things, right? They are more cautious on opaque or highly leveraged firms where you can't get enough information on a firm. Generally your traditional banks won't provide credit to those. These are cheaper when the borrower qualifies, when you have good credit history, right? You have good business, maybe so some your revenue is very good, all of those things are there. That's when you might get lower interest rates, right? So who borrows where firms with negative EBITDA, high debt, or tangible collateral are the natural private credit clients. Sorry, low tangible collateral. So you have high debt already, your EBITDA is basically these are the firms, you can say, kind of the startups, right? Who are just the budding firms. These would be the ones who might seek private credit than your
Twinkle, now we know, Twinkle, now we know why all the AI firms have borrowed money on private credit, because their EBITDA is negative. They are only loss making.
yeah, obviously, right? No bank would put their, and AI needs big money. No bank will blindly put in money in such a firm, right? And they, by regulation also, they are not allowed to do so.
In
Okay.
fact, all this, this year, there was this big story in the market. Everybody knows this IPO of SpaceX, Elon Musk, SpaceX, and
Yeah.
that company in last year net loss was about more than $5 billion, net loss of $5 billion. And it got
Yeah,
an IPO. It got an IPO valuation of 1.7 trillion, and now the stock is collapsing. The stock price is collapsing now. Actually, SpaceX.
there are multiple such stocks in today's market
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
will
5 billion net loss of 5 billion, but they are getting all funding, private equity, private credit, everything they have got, fund issues,
find.
everything
Yeah,
they have done, and the
because
company is
people
a net
are
loss 5 billion.
optimistic on maybe the founder and what he's trying to do, right? So yeah, next let's move down. We know our cost of capital formula, right? That cost of capital depends on the cost of your debt and cost of equity. That's what exactly they are doing in this formula. That COD is cost of debt, after tax cost of debt. COE is your cost of equity, and TD over V is total debt value, total debt compared to your total value, right? And E over V, like basically what's your debt part and what's your equity part out of the total capital. That so this is your normal WAC formula, and according to this, basically any we know, how capital cost of capital framework works, right? That if your WAC is a certain number, then only accordingly you decide if you should take leverage, you should go for equity. How it is that a lender with the lower WAC can charge lower loan rates and win share. So the WAC gap between the banks and fund is the competitive battleground. That's where banks and private funds will kind of compete with each other, because now in the upcoming slides we'll do why a private credit has lower WAC than your banks. Okay, their cost of capital is lower. How? First is cost of equity. Banks' cost of equity rose above the business development companies like the BDCs after the GFC, right? Higher market risk and stricter regulations pushed it up. They are saying that yeah, that the bank's cost of capital have increased after the global financial crisis, because there was stricter regulation. Not everyone is was willing to put money into the banks, right? So market higher market risk and stricter capital rules will also push their cost of capital. And compared to your private credit, their cost of capital was lower, because it's your institutional investors are there. That's the first bit of your WAC formula. Next part is cost of debt, where BDC's COD is slightly higher than the banks. Their cost of debt is slightly higher. Because these are wholesale funded, so COD tracks policy rates. Banks sticky deposit rates more. Rise more slowly, because their deposit rates are sticky, right? People generally do it for long term, so their cost of debt rise less slowly. But in general, if you combine both the factors, the cost of capital for private credits will come out to be lower than your banks. Right, so banks lost their equity cost edge to the business development companies, and the BDCs only kept a small cost of a small debt. Basically, they have kept this part lower, right? This part was already lower for BDCs, so the whole formula worked out better for your bank these business development companies than your normal banks. Got it? I hope it's understood. Next is the back convergence. How the gap was closed pre GFC. BDCs WAC about 200 basis points above the banks. Like their cost of capital was higher pre GFC for the business development companies. But in 2010 to 2019, this spread fell about by 250 basis points. Like if earlier the cost of capital was 2% higher for BDCs, now it is about 2.5% lower than the banks. What closed this gap is falling BDC cost of equity. Their cost of equity got down because of more institutional investors and everything, and rising BDC leverage. Their BDC rising BDC leverage, yeah, their leverage also got up. Basically what it means is, again, this is, if you go back to your formula, this part went up, this is already lower, right? When your leverage goes up, we have seen like your BDC leverage has gone up. That means their larger share of their loan book is covered with debt rather than equity. Right? Just one second. Yeah, now this because their spread for BDC has gone down, this part has gone down, like their cost of debt for BDC has gone down, but their debt has increased, so that's why the whole formula will come down, correct? Like earlier, for if their cost of debt was higher, now their cost of debt has gone down, so they increased the leverage, the whole cost of capital will come down, and that's why WAC will kind of come out lower to for the BDCs. Got it? So yeah, here they have given an example, like a Meridian Capital BDC cost of equity was 10% earlier, cost of debt was 6%. It shifts its mix from 60 equity 40 debt to 40 equity 60 debt. Now equity and debt mix have changed, and its cost of equity edges up to 10.5% as leverage rises. Now cost of equity has also gone up. Before, if you calculate back, the 10% cost of equity with 60% equity and 6% cost of debt with 40% equity, your total cost of capital came out to be 8.4%. Now since cost of equity has gone up, they have decreased the equity portion, only 40% equity, and cost of debt remains the same, and they have increased the debt portion, that's why, and your total cost of capital has come down to 7.8%. So now when they change their equity and debt ratios, their total cost of capital has come down, and it is it has become cheaper for these BDCs to provide credit.
Yeah,
Got it?
Twinkle, I have a very interesting question. Now, you say the proportion of debt has basically gone up in BDCs,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
So that means for them, the debt is actually the new accounts, the new deposits they have obtained from the retail investors and so on, right?
In this case, it might not really be deposits, right? Because
Or it is
one
new,
thing is, it could be investments, or they have taken debt,
yeah,
because they can't really take deposits.
exactly.
Your
Only
BDCs.
thing they can take long-term funds from life insurance companies, pension funds, and
Yes, yes,
endowments, and so
they
on.
can do that, but they
Yeah,
can't. Everyone can't be deposit holders.
yeah. So
Then they
you
will
think BDCs
become
are
bank,
so?
right?
My question is, do you think BDCs are taking like debt, like they're issuing bonds subscribed by the insurance companies and so on, something like that?
I'm not sure, and I don't think that that would be the case. Like, though
I
it
was
might seem like it's a direct thing and all that, it wouldn't be so. Like, this is sponsored by insurer, this is done by private,
no. The only
your
doubt I
pension
have is
fund.
BDCs when they increase their debt proportion. How do they do that? It's not public deposit, right? It must be institutional, whatever borrowing they're doing from institutions like
Yeah,
life
yeah,
insurance
this would
companies.
be that. Right.
Mhm.
They can't take retail deposits, because any firm that starts taking retail deposits, they have they will come under regulator purview, because that's a very sensitive concern for any economy, any country.
You just
It's your normal
correlate.
common people.
You just correlate with your mortgage-based security structured product, wherein your you know one side in your asset in balance sheet, which would be like your manufacturing factories or technology firms, and other side your investors who are giving you money on the liability side. That way you correlate this.
Right. Yeah. Uh, so it's just in overall scenario you can understand that how you can, basically the point here is that if BDCs are able to decrease their cost of capital, there are ways to do so, right? In a normal scenario, in an actual scenario, in fact, things might work very differently than we see here, right? Also we see in VAC formula also there were multiple changes we discussed, right, when you had studied it in part 1, that this happens, that happens, even if your cost of debt is lower, right? Let's say it's 100% debt, then the cost of capital will come out to be 6%. But would that be really, in an actual scenario, would that be the right thing to do? That won't be right. Like, it could have been 100% debt if you are only going by the WAC formula. Then your 6%, your WAC will come out to be 6%, but that won't work in actual scenarios. So there are multiple levers that need to be balanced. Okay. So yeah, key points that drove convergences. First is the cost of equity. BDC COE fell relative to the banks, about 100 basis point of narrowing for your cost of equity. That has gone down for BDCs. Leverage increased, about 150 basis points of narrowing, right? The cost of debt played almost no role. BDC bank COD gap stayed small. Their cost of debt did not change. It was almost same, but because leverage increased and equity fell, that's where their total cost came down. You can go through the practice question.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we are at the end of the chapter. What we have studied is like how the private credit has gone up, right? Why it grew? Because of low rates, weak bank efficiency, tighter regulations for the banks, and rising leverage. The funding shift for BDCs, their cost of capital converged with banks because of lower COE and higher leverage. What to watch is retail inflows, how that works out, rising leverage, and concentration and bank fund interlinkages, right? So that's all for this chapter.